Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka, it's my great pleasure to welcome you today for this discussion. The discussion is on the preliminary findings of the Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe's application of comprehensive general equilibrium modeling to assess how recent United States tariff policies may affect Sri Lanka's economy. And Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe is a research fellow at IPS, and he holds a PhD in economics from the Ohio State University. And without further ado, I invite Dr. Asanka to continue with his presentation.
Thank you, Chaya, and I warmly welcome all of you for attending to the IPS. And thank you very much for attending this event, accepting our invitation. This is basically an attempt to estimate the likely economic impact on Sri Lanka of these various tariffs imposed by the current US administration. So this presentation is based on these key areas. First, brief introduction of the tariff structure right now we are facing in the US. And briefly, I am going to explain how we model the impact to find out the effect on Sri Lanka and especially the economy and the labor market. We conducted various counterfactual experiments. I will explain them one by one. So this op-ed opinion piece was very famous like last week, about exactly 7 days ago, published by the United States Trade Representative. They boasted that they remade the global order, mainly changing this old Bretton Woods system, turning into a new system. The trade representative called it as a Turnberry system because the EU-US agreement was finalized in Turnberry Hotel of President Trump. Well, what is this new system? So the old system was based on WTO principles. We even have this system now. There's a dispute settlement body if there are deviations from the pre-agreed tariff schedules. However, right now, US has proposed a new system with unilaterally forming the tariff structure. And tariff as the formidable stick, and the carrot they are offering is world's most lucrative consumer market, access to that consumer market. They are going to enforce this arrangement through the threat of higher tariffs. For example, if a country deviates from the agreements, they will swiftly bring up the tariff level. So what happened in Turnberry? It was a very significant incident because the EU accepted high tariff without retaliation. People believe that maybe EU will be the vanguard fighter when it comes to protecting the multilateral system. But instead of that, they accepted 15%. And not only that, they gave promises of concessions only for the US. So we were always trying to find out whether as a country, as a member of WTO, can we do that? Can we give it only to one country, the tariff concessions? But EU is going to do that. So when you look at theoretical contribution, what happened to the US, how the US trade regime became a more protectionist trade regime. There are various papers published. The main paper was actually the one published by Otto Don Hansen in around 2013. This was very famous as China Syndrome paper. And then there was another paper by them arguing that the old argument that low-wage countries' imports might not be a threat to developed countries' labor market is actually wrong, and there can be localized labor market effects. Then there were various other papers trying to identify what were the causes, why this happened. Otter was bringing the argument that less educated American workers were affected by cheap imports. So they voted against this more liberal political system. And Danny Roderick and especially Panoris, they have a very interesting linking of these economic forces and the conservative grievances they fuel this populist movement. And very recently, about 2024, there were papers coming from more left-leaned economists like Isabella Weber, mainly the seller inflation, that the greed in the capitalist system full inflation, and as a result of that, Trump could win again. Anyway, after 2016, US was heading for protectionist trade regime slowly, even in the Biden era. There were various consumer subsidies under the Inflation Reduction Act, and there were targeted industrial policies through CHIPS Act, especially targeting AI, advanced chips, and electric vehicles. However, economists were less harsh towards Biden policies. There was a reason for that, because distortions were selective, not broad-based tariff hikes like this. So let's look at what is the tariff landscape in the US currently. People mainly focus on the reciprocal rate, like 20%, 30%, or 44%, but it is not the case. There are many different tariff types right now enforced by the US. One is, of course, a reciprocal tariff. There are individualized rates for the countries. The other one is main weapon used by the Trump administration is the sectional tariff under Section 232. There are steel, aluminum, and about 1 week ago, there were copper tariff about 50%. And there are many investigations going on for pharmaceuticals and also these lumber products and semiconductors. So these investigations are going on. And there are country-specific additional tariffs. For Brazil, addition to that 10%, there is a 40%. And for India, addition to 25%, there is 25% declared right now. It is not enforced yet. Within, I think, 21 days, it will be enforced if there will be no deal. And there are various exemptions. There was a long list of exemptions to the executive order, and also after that, there was a CBP exception. And there are country-specific exceptions, especially for Brazil. There are 800 product lists exempted from additional tariff. So it's like about 50% of Brazil exports are exempted. And there are deals which modify tariffs, and some tariffs are not modified by the deal. So it is a complex. For example, the EU-US deal, they are not applicable. The agreed 15% is not applicable for steel and aluminum tariff. The EU will continue to pay 50%. But when it comes to the UK, the agreement is applicable. So when we calculate the effective rates of tariff to find out what will be the economic impact, we need to factor in almost all of these changes, unless the estimates can be wrong. And there are retaliations in Trade War II. That means Trade War II means the current trade war going on. Canada and China announced some retaliations. They are enforced. And there are Trade War I tariffs. For example, US-China Trade War I there are Section 301 tariff and China retaliation. Another complexity is some Section 232 tariff are applied on value composition. For example, steel and aluminum tariff are applicable only for the steel content. Copper, the same thing. So why US market is important for Sri Lanka? We all know that about 25% of our exports go to the US, and these percentages are varying by sector. For example, manufacturing of wear and apparel, about 37% of our exports are going to the US, and rubber products 32%. And some products like these precious stones, about 68% are going to the US. And there are various other exports going to the US, for example, even Christmas decorations, some other vehicle equipment, these exports are going to the US. Okay, so now what is the new effective rate? We calculated this factoring in all those exemptions, new tariffs I explained earlier. This shows the current effective rate for wear and apparel sector for the major wear and apparel exporters to the US. So I calculated these values for only the products Sri Lanka exports to the US, because we need to find out what is the competitive edge. When we do that, we should factor in all only the products Sri Lanka exports. Sri Lanka exports about 1.8 billion to the US in wear and apparel products. So you can see in the second column, what is the volume of exports by each country in products Sri Lanka exports to the US. For example, China, out of 19.2 billion exports, 18 billion exports are within the HS code Sri Lanka exports. So China is a direct competitor in the US market. Vietnam, Bangladesh, it is the same. And you can see the tariff change from base rate to August rate. August rate is the current effective rate. Sri Lanka's effective rate is 36.8%. China 51.3%. Our neighbors like Bangladesh, their rates are 36.4%. But there are some advantaged countries, countries in very advantageous positions like Mexico. Mexico's effective rate is 3.1%. It is because of Canada, United States, Mexico free trade agreement. These reciprocal tariffs are not applicable for the free trade agreement. These products go to the US under a USMCA tariff. Countries like Honduras, you can see their effective rate is low. There are a few things going on. One thing is their reciprocal rate is 10%, and also in the base rate, they have very low tariff rate. They are under this AGOA, African Growth and Opportunity Act. Under that act, they have favorable tariffs. We don't know the fate of this AGOA agreement. It should end this year. If Congress will not extend, they will continue to have this kind of tariff advantage over Sri Lanka. This is the rubber sector. These are the two major exports by Sri Lanka, wear and apparel and rubber exports. You can see Sri Lanka's effective rate is now 20.2, and the major competitors are actually Canada and Mexico. They have very low effective tariff rate because of USMCA. So this tariff changes for Sri Lanka is not even. It is not rising by 20 percentage point evenly across all the sectors because of the various exemptions and the sectoral tariffs I explained. For example, you can see fabricated metal, the effective rate is going up by about 13 percentage point. This is mainly, there are some exemptions, but when you consider non-ferrous metal, non-ferrous metal products effective rate is going up by about 47 percentage points because of the sectional tariff, like steel and aluminum tariff, which are at 50% now. And other minerals, you can see the base rate is 0.78. It is going up by just 8.85. It is because graphite kind of products are within this group. Graphite is exempted from any kind of reciprocal tariff. Well, let me briefly explain what is JTAP, what is the model we use for this tariff modeling, why we picked that. There are two ways to model this kind of trade shock. One is partial equilibrium modeling. We take one sector, give the tariff shock, and find the effect only for that sector. It is not transmitting across the economy through input-output linkages. So I believe that this might not be adequate for this kind of shock because shock is large and every country is facing this. However, PE models will give useful information at country level if we want to use that, especially when it comes to free trade agreements and licenses. So due to the nature of shock, we use Global Trade Analysis Project. This is called GTAP. There are 65 sectors in this model and 150 regions. Regions are actually mostly countries. However, model can be aggregated by sector and region according to the preference of the modeler, because you cannot run 65 into 160 regions in a normal, maybe you need a supercomputer for that. Even that, the trade-off between that, achieving that kind of computational power and the information you get are minimum. So we can aggregate these regions to a workable number of regions and sectors and run the model. So I used 48 sectors. That means all the merchandise goods sectors are in my model. I aggregated service sector and amenities together, but accommodation, mainly this tourism industry related service supply sectors separately. So I have 48 sectors. And I have 36 countries or 36 regions. And within these 36 regions, we have all the South Asian countries except Bhutan and Maldives, all major ASEAN economies, especially the countries which entered into deals with the US, for example, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia. I have them individually represented. And major economies like Canada, China, Mexico, US, Brazil, these are separately. In addition, the EU 27 and UK, they are also separate regions. So this kind of model is flexible enough to shock country-specific US tariffs and deals, as I mentioned, and these are flexible to detect the changes in bilateral trade flows within major trade partners of Sri Lanka, like EU and UK. So as I said, there is a trade-off to avoid this becoming a very complex and useless model. So we brought down this to 48 to 36 aggregation. So these are the 36 regions. I have Australia. Ex-RCEP means the rest of RCEP countries like New Zealand and Brunei are within this group. China, Japan, Korea, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines. Those countries are, and we have some South American countries due to the importance of the ongoing tariff increase. For example, Brazil separated. So these are the 48 sectors I have. We have agricultural sectors like paddy and wheat. With the US trade, most important sectors are WAP, that is wear in apparel. RPP means rubber products. From import side, VOL, this is vegetable oils. Main import from US is soybean residuals. It is within VOL. Okay, so this GTAP version 11 is, this has 2017 as the base year, but we know drastic changes happened since 2017. For example, there was a trade war between China, US in 2018, and also relative economic sizes of regions changed. As an example, Sri Lanka's economy contracted in this period. And productive factor quantities changed, labor, capital mainly, and countries entered into new FTAs within this period. So bilateral tariff schedules changed. So what we did was first, we updated the model to 2024, factoring in all of these changes that happened between 2017 to 2024. So we shocked the model for real GDP, labor, population, and updated the tariff schedule reflecting the 2024 tariff schedule of the US. And major economies like EU, mainly Sri Lanka. Because if you look at these international data sources, they are not much accurate. When it comes to wheat, for example, you can see there are tariffs, but actually charged tariffs are pretty much different. For example, for some products, you don't need to pay custom tariff. You just need to pay cess and pal. So these things should be reflected in the model, unless estimates will be mostly overestimated when you cut down tariff. So we bought this Sri Lanka custom database at HS 8-digit and calculated these effective rates, updated the model. So US rates we got from US census, actually US ITC, United States International Trade Commission, they have import data at HTSUS, that is their classification at 8-digit and 10-digit they have, but up to 6-digit they are internationally comparable. So we calculated effective rates using this tariff data from the US. We did not obtain this from other sources because I believe this might be the most accurate data source we can obtain. So the first, now we have a baseline. We have 2024 updated for the real world economic conditions. Then what we did was we did counterfactual simulations. For example, we showed the model with different tariff rates by the US. The first scenario we did was just to check what would have happened if our rate was 30%, while all the other countries got this July 31st declared rates. For example, in July 31st, EU got 15%, Japan 15%, like that. And in this scenario, India got 25%. Brazil got 50% with exemptions. And there were various trade deals announced. So we factored in that changes also. For example, countries like Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam, they have promised, as it is communicated, we haven't seen any solid trade deal, but the idea communicated is they will eliminate all the tariff for the US. And EU has promised to eliminate all industrial tariff for the US, not the agricultural tariff. So we changed those, we showed those tariffs too in the model. The key change is Sri Lanka is facing 30% in this scenario. So in this, Sri Lanka's real GDP could go down by 0.083% from the base year of 2024. And well, I want to explain one thing. In this kind of general equilibrium modeling, we assume two closures. One is the standard closure. In the standard closure, what we assume is wages are flexible. So the economy will maintain the full employment. assume in the wear and apparel sector, now people are laid off, then they will be absorbed by the other sectors. In the unemployment closure, what we assume is wages are rigid, slowly adjusting, and unemployment is in the model. You can expect that in unemployment scenario, the real GDP contraction can be more than that the standard closure, because now productive labor force is idling. So as expected, we can see if unemployment is allowed in the model, 30% could contract Sri Lanka's GDP by, real GDP by 0.2 to 3%. When it comes to exports to the US, the exports effect could be drastic. Sri Lanka's exports could go down by about 48.5% or 1.5 billion to the US, that is out of 3 billion. Wear and apparel exports could go down by 44.3%, while the worst hit sector is rubber sector. As I showed in the differential tariff, you could see our major competitors have much better rates compared to Sri Lanka. The effect could be about 63.2%. So these export effects would be transmitted to the labor market. For example, in the wear and apparel sector, the unskilled labor demand could go down by 10%. And demand for unskilled labor from rubber sector could go down by 5.8%. So in the unemployment closure, we allow unemployment. So because of this 30%, unemployment or unskilled labor supply could go down by 0.39%, or when it comes to skilled labor, it could be 0.62%. So key takeaways of this scenario is real output loss ranges could be from 0.08 to 0.2, and US exports expected to decline by about 48%, and significant impact on labor market. So avoiding a 30% tariff is a substantial relief for Sri Lanka. So now let's see what is the impact of the current effective rate. Current effective rate is 20% for Sri Lanka. These are the assumptions, actually the description of the real world, not just assumptions. Sri Lanka is facing 20%. Other key countries 50%. I took India 25% because it is not enforced yet. And also there is a possibility that a deal would be cut out with India and US in the interim period. Even if US will go ahead with 25% additional tariff, there can be various exemptions. Anyway, I have a simulation with 50% also, but for this, India has 25%. So in this scenario, Sri Lanka's real GDP contracts by 0.007%. The largest impact, of course, on the US because of there are many things going on actually. One thing is when you increase tariff, your currency also is strength. As a result of that, your competitiveness go down, your exports also go down, and the domestic industries now cannot secure enough raw materials. As a result of that, economy contracts more in the US. But in Sri Lanka, the effect is about 0.007%. When you allow for the unemployment, you can see the effect is larger. For Sri Lanka, it becomes 0.012. For the US, it is 1.45 in the unemployment closure. So these, in globally estimated models, Sri Lanka is actually not a region in most of the models, but US, of course, is a region. So when you check this Yale Growth Lab and the estimates of the Victoria University and places like this, what is it called, Trade Alert. So their estimates are online, on par with this kind of estimate, close to 1.5 contraction, but you can see their assumptions are sometimes much strong in some cases. For example, Victoria University estimate is a bit higher than 1.45. It is because they assume full-blown trade war between EU and the US. In my model, we don't assume because it is not the case. US is in an agreement with the US, with the EU. So what will happen to the, what would happen to the exports of Sri Lanka? You can see where in apparel sector might contract by like 12% these exports to the US. But you can see the overall export contraction to the world is about 4.67%. Why this happened? Now, when Sri Lanka's exports go down, in the model, our currency, our real exchange rate adjusts. Our factor market, the cost of labor, capital, and those things go down. As a result of that, our competitiveness go up. So for some market, our exports will go up. And main thing is EU is in a favorable deal with the US. You can see EU economy can be expected to grow amidst this tariff war. So Sri Lanka's exports to the EU and UK market might grow, partially compensating the loss in the US market. However, overall exports to the world in wear and apparel, rubber products, other manufacturing, other field crops, these are the major products Sri Lanka export to the US. The overall exports volume can go down. So you can see the product, for example, in rubber products, we export tires, gloves, rubber sheets, some other manufacturing means these festival decorations, and those. Other field crops include coconut, tea, and seafood. Machinery, mainly we export this forklifting and those kind of equipment to the US. So we use these model estimates, and then we calculate the labor force composition using 2023 labor force survey data. Then we map what would be the likely impact in numbers in the labor market. So the wear and apparel contraction could result about 15,853 jobs lost in this wear and apparel sector. Vast majority of these are unskilled workers. For example, it is about 13,000 in the wear and apparel sector. So other sectors' impact is proportionately less when it comes to the numbers, because these sectors are not employing as much as the wear and apparel sector. Wear and apparel sector has about 473,000 workers in 2023 labor force survey. So out of that, about 383,000, these are unskilled workers. So what is happening to the overall economic output of Sri Lanka by various sectors? You can see rubber, wear and apparel, manufacturing and machinery and equipment, they contract, and also textiles. However, certain sectors will grow because now there are cheap labor, other sectors can absorb these resources into those sectors, and those sectors will grow. Unfortunately, some of the sectors grow in agricultural sectors. You can see this meat production and sugar cane. The issue is, we were always talking about structural transformation, the need to move this low productive sector to high productive industries. But you can see this structural transformation is reversing with this high tariff in the US market. With that, the demand for unskilled labor will also go down with these sectors, but in some other sectors, they will be absorbed. Mainly, absorption happens in agricultural sector and service sector. So what will happen in the US market? The US import demand will go down in most of these sectors because of high tariffs. BPH is pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceutical demand is growing because pharmaceutical is not subject to any reciprocal tariff. That is why when it comes to this new tariff rate of 39% declared for Switzerland, Switzerland is not much worried about that because most of the exports are pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are exempted from tariff. But other sectors contract, the import demand will be contracting. For example, where in apparel sector, we can expect that US demand will contract by about 8% globally, the global demand, and US demand from all the suppliers. This is something we need to focus because when these rates are declared, the first impression was to compare our tariff rate with our competitors. So we were saying, okay, we got 20, Bangladesh has similar rates, Vietnam has similar rates. But in economics, when there is a tariff rise, that means price rise. The first effect is trade destruction. That means consumers are not buying as much as they used to. For example, President Trump himself said about 1 month ago that maybe a little girl will have to buy $2 except instead of $6. Like that, the consumption go down. This might be substantial based on the tariff pass-through rate. So what is tariff pass-through? Pass-through means if the 20% tariff rise is passed to the consumers, then the pass-through is about 100%. So the empirical literature is showing that in 2018 trade war, in the limited trade war, the pass-through was near 100% to the US. However, this time around, we are not expecting it might be 100% because this shock is large. Almost all the consumer products are under a high tariff. As a result of that, there can be some absorption by the suppliers. I think there are some surveys conducted by researchers in Canada. What they are saying is some of the Canadian suppliers are absorbing the cost, but some is passed to the consumers. So these kind of models actually we assume that this pass-through will be near complete. So this demand contraction will totally depend on this the rate of the pass-through. Okay, now US has 20% on Sri Lanka. What will happen to US exports to the country? So this is also important because it's a general equilibrium model. So everything is changing it when there is a shock. So we calculated that as a result of 20% tariff shock, Sri Lanka's real GDP goes down. As a result of that, our demand for various products, including maybe protein, electric equipment, they can go down. As a result of that, major exports of US to Sri Lanka can contract significantly. For example, this vegetable oil sector, that is soybean oil, soybean residuals, that demand can go down by about 15%. As a result of that, loss can be 19.2. In electric equipment, it can be USD million 11.7 or 32%. So altogether, Sri Lanka's US exports can go down by about 23.7% or 102 million. So this is the importance of this kind of tariff wars. You cannot assume that everything will be as in the base year, once you change the tariff, everything is changed. Okay, so these are the key takeaways. Sorry about the typo. This is not. Oh, okay, no. This is key takeaways. Okay. What is this? Okay. So key takeaways of this 20% tariff, exports to US when we are in apparel can go down by about 12%. The employment loss could be about 15 or close to 16,000. When it comes to trade defect, US exports to Sri Lanka could contract by about 24%. Most affected our major import from the US. Overall economic impact is about 0.007. You can see it is not that much of a loss because the economy maintains the full employment. Other sectors grow when one sector is contracting. Something happened to slides. Okay. So then I did another counterfactual experiment. In this, what I assumed was, now Sri Lanka has 20%, but we know that trade agreements are generally reciprocal. If Sri Lanka agreed on something with the US, there might be some concession to the US. So in the general media talks, even in cycle, there were researchers, we were thinking about, okay, eliminating the paratariff might be a good concession to the US. So I shocked the model in this counterfactual experiment. We assume everything is, as I explained earlier, Sri Lanka's rate is 20%. In addition to that, Sri Lanka eliminates paratariff for the US. Okay, so this table shows the tariff structure for the key commodities Sri Lanka import from the US. The first sector is this vegetable oil sector. You can see the weighted average tariff is about 10%, and weighted average paratariff is also 10%. There is no custom duty for this particular group. Product level that can be different, but as an aggregated group, there is no paratariff or SVL imposed on this. But some other sectors like VF means vegetables and mainly vegetables. Yes, vegetables, fruits and nuts. This is a sector we import these various nuts and products like apples. You can see the SVL rate is very high. It is about 28.6 at the trade weighted SVL. Yes. These are the top 10 imported products from the US. You can see oil cake and other solid residuals of soybean. The paratariff rate is about 13%. This is from custom. Actually, this might be 10% plus 2.5. This 12.5 actually, cess and pile. And custom duty rate is 0.04. The total tariff rate is about 13.05. But I think this is about 12.5. But custom values can be a bit different. And this yarn, you can see wheat grain, especially medicaments, there is no tariff. I saw in some circles, it was said that maybe we should remove US tariff for US medicaments, but we are not imposing any tariff for the medicaments. Yeah, overall, what we did was we shocked the model, eliminating paratariff. So then there is this huge debate about what are the paratariffs. So Sri Lanka has various tariffs. For example, cess, port and airport development levy, There is SSCL, Social Security Contribution Levy, SCL, Special Commodity Levy, like that there are excise duties. We did not consider this SCL or SSCL, these kind of things as para-tariff for obvious reasons. When SCL is imposed, other tariffs are not imposed for a product. So we consider it as a custom tariff. We did not consider it as a para-tariff. And SSCL is actually a non-distortionary kind of a tariff. It is applied for domestic production also. So we did not consider that. Only cess and PAL were considered as para-tariff. So when we compare the 20% scenario, if Sri Lanka eliminates para-tariff, real GDP will contract a bit more compared to the 0.07 when there is only 20%. I will explain why is it happening. However, now Sri Lanka's import from the US could grow by about 3.87%. This is about 16 million more import from the US. So largest gains are from the soybean residual imports, the number one product. However, we can see the import competition growing in dairy, meat, and tobacco sectors. So as a result of that, the domestic output goes down. This is why you can see when Sri Lanka eliminates para-tariff, the real GDP contraction is a bit more than the 20% scenario. One major argument about this tariff is actually revenue impact. So we calculated revenue in 2024. Sri Lanka earned about 25 billion from all the US import from the US. So someone can argue that this might be the entire loss, 25. It is not the case. This is like, assume now for a product, Sri Lanka removes a tariff for the US. Now Sri Lanka imports more from the US. And some trade from a tariff paying countries diverted to the US now. So the revenue impact amplified. And as a result of that, the domestic sector's production level will be changing, their VAT and everything is changing. So revenue impact should factor in almost everything like that. So our estimates show that compared to the 20% scenario, Sri Lanka's revenue loss might be just 0.28% if we remove all the para-tariff for the US. So this table shows what will happen in different sectors when there will be para-tariff removal. You can see this vegetable oil, that sector will see about 40% more import from the US. Other field crops, chemicals, this tobacco and dairy and milk, dairy products mainly. We see about 37.93% more imports. However, textile imports is still negative. This is because of 20% tariff of the US. Now our wear and apparel sector has contracted. Now we are not importing as we used to be. So what will happen to trade deficit? Because the trade deficit was the major reason behind this tariff war and everything. Trade deficit is actually not changing much when it comes to 20%. It is changing by absolute value, but if you remember that equation used by the USTR, if you calculate the ratio in the new 20% scenario, ratio is same. But absolute value is changing because Sri Lanka's exports are contracting by about 600 million. However, you can see US exports to the Sri Lanka is also contracting from 433 to 330 in 20% tariff scenario. However, if US manages to get trade concession from Sri Lanka. That means Sri Lanka eliminates tariffs. Then their export level will go up to 449 million. And our exports to Sri Lanka will not be changing much from 20%. As a result of that, they can get much more contracted trade deficit, but still trade deficit will be about 2 billion. This is because this trade deficit is a natural trade deficit because we are producing what, Sri Lanka is producing what Sri Lanka can produce based on the comparative advantage. US has an incentive of buying this product from Sri Lanka. Now, if 2 billion itself is a worrying thing for the US, we can expect that they might be asking Sri Lanka for advance purchasing commitments. That is what is happening in other countries. Like oil, I see some countries are promising to buy more growing pains, but I don't think Sri Lanka has any use of that kind of purchases. And obviously, we cannot invest in the US economy like EU, Japan, and South Korea has promised. Then I ran a host of other alternative scenarios. Mainly, we should look at what will happen if India gets 50%. Because in wear and apparel also, India is a competitor in the US market. It is a favorable outcome for Sri Lanka when it comes to the real GDP. Compared to Sri Lanka's 20% and India's 25% scenario, if India gets 50% and we maintain our, that 20% tariff rate, what is the effective tariff rate right now, then Sri Lanka's GDP will go up by 0.005%. So this is happening not because we are getting any market share from India in the US market. For example, you can see still Sri Lanka's exports to the US in wear and apparel will go down by 10%. Earlier it was 12%. What is happening is when India's economy contracts, their factor prices go down. As a result of that, what we import from India can be much cheaper. So as a result of that, Sri Lanka might see a favorable real GDP impact. Then we did another counterfactual scenario. Here what we assume was Sri Lanka gets 15 instead of 20, and Sri Lanka cuts tariff. Then now our rate is 15 compared to other exporters to the US. We are in a competitive age now. Wear and apparel exports can go up by about 10%, 10.6%. As a result of that, real GDP effect can be about positive 0.038%. However, to get this 15%, there might be some reciprocal arrangement. That means Sri Lanka will have to give some concessions. As I showed, when we give that such concessions, the import competition will be higher in certain sectors. For example, sectors like meat production, for example, if there will be 20% tariff, the model shows that the sector will grow about 0.9% output-wise. But assume now 20% plus Sri Lanka cuts tariff for the US, then the growth will be reduced just for like 0.33%. That is why we see this negative real GDP impact in that scenario. Again, same thing goes with milk, because our dairy market is more protected. If we remove these things, their output can be affected due to the import competition. However, net impact is positive in this scenario. Real GDP will go up by 0.038%. Okay, so these are the counterfactual simulations we did. We need to do a few simulations more to factor in two things. One is So for example, President Trump's argument was, now US is earning more tariff revenue, they can cut income tax. So in the model, as it is, we cannot shock the model like that. We need to change the equations and rewrap the model using GEMPAC. I am working on that thing, that assumption. However, yesterday there was this paper published in International Economics, our flagship journal in our field. So they did something like that. What they show is, if this tariff revenue collection will be passed as income tax cuts to the consumers, US welfare will go up because of that. That means maybe this demand loss can be lower in that scenario. The other counterfactual scenario we should do is, in this model, we assume that investment clears, investment flows to the highest return country. So it's like more liberal flow of investments. But Sri Lanka is facing this condition that we cannot issue bonds until like 2028. So we might need to factor in that. I changed the closure and ran that. What happens actually, our import level go down, but the economy impact is not that changing from our estimate. What happens is that now we need to maintain the trade balance as it is. We cannot let trade balance deteriorate because of the new constraint. Well, having said those things, what we can conclude? Of course, Sri Lanka has a strong economic incentive for the negotiations and get concessions as much as possible. But again, concessions are reciprocal. Whatever Sri Lanka will get, Sri Lanka will have to give something. Those will generate distributional effect across various sectors. One key area is dairy and meat production. Another thing is, now when President Trump announced that, okay, I'm going to increase tariff level by 10%, the idea was that it is like a bargaining or negotiation tactic. They are not going to actually implement that. But I think it is safe to assume now US high tariff will remain as long as this administration will be there. Then there was various theories to explain why did EU accepted 15% instead of bringing US to the WTO dispute settlement body. Then a lot of people start to say that EU is expecting these tariffs are not permanent. Two things can happen. One thing is US midterm election in next year. The other thing is that a future president will not simply continue with this tariff. But there's a big hole in this argument. We don't know who will be the future president. But again, we see a general tendency towards protectionism in the US, whatever the party in power. So now Sri Lanka's major worry should be about this, maybe not these numbers, the fragmentation of the global trade system. We were always arguing that Sri Lanka is a small country, we should join to the global value chains like that, but now there are no global value chains when it comes to manufacturing. US is forcing countries like South Korea to invest there. And the investments are not coming our way. So that is the problem. The other thing is the so-called ternary system. It is not stable because US, of course, has a bargaining power, but what about the other countries? They don't have any dispute settlement mechanism. We cannot challenge if US deviates from the agreements. If we deviate from the agreement of Sri Lanka or South Korea, they can, of course, increase tariffs because they have this market power right now. This is an imbalanced system. So one solution is there are still players within the region who are respecting these trade deals and have trust on this free market, especially when it comes to liberal trade order. We need to accelerate our this process of joining to this country. These trade blocks, one thing is RCEP. The other thing is we should be very proactive about the other changes in the other markets. So about 25% goes to the US and another similar percentage is going to UK and EU. EU market is evolving always. There are various regulations. One is EUDR. EUDR will be European Union deforestation regulation. It will be enforced by the end of this year. If Sri Lanka will not be able to comply with that, that means EU market is shut down for us. So as a result of that, the loss can be about close to 300 million when it comes to rubber products. Even if we maintain the compliance, our compliance cost will go up. However, there are good news. We are hearing from various corners. Cabinet has approved this GIS mapping of the rubber lands. It is a good way forward because there should be a QR code or something to show that these products follow all the rules. So those things we should consider and implement to absorb this US shock. Again, if you ask me, okay, how sure are you about these numbers, like about 15,000, or the export losses can be this much? Well, as I said, there are assumptions. For example, this tariff pass-through. Tariff pass-through, I'm not expecting it might be 100% because producers might be forced to absorb some of this tariff cost to maintain the market share in the US. In that case, yes, the immediate export effect might be less than this, but in the long run, such absorption is not sustainable because their cost is going up, profit margins are lower, and at one point they will have to pass it to the US consumers. And the retailers will try their best to absorb the cost, like Walmart and these big fashion chains and in the US, the retailers. Also, they will try to force the suppliers to absorb the cost, some of the cost of tariff by the suppliers. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks again for attending this. We would like to head for the discussion. If there are any questions also, you can please. Yeah, and it is great if you can introduce yourself before.
Asanka, for that very interesting study. I just have like a few questions. One is about the USMCA. I'm just curious to know how the rules of origin works in USMCA, whether that could be a restricting factor in terms of being able to take on the apparel exports, for example, that would go from Vietnam or other places, whether the rules of origin of USMCA is restrictive or whether the USMCA allows Mexico to source fabrics from anywhere in the world. This is one question. The other one that I wanted to ask is that there is also this fear, especially in ASEAN, that comes quite a lot, is about the Chinese products flooding these markets because now China can't access US, and as a result, they will be flooding other markets with these products at very low values, and how it will affect domestic production and the impact, whether the model can capture it. The third one I have is you had the unemployment rates, but the impact on wages, especially when you're talking about the tariff pass-through, if the producers are to absorb some of these taxes, whether it will have impact on wages of even the people who are employed.
Yeah, thanks, Bhajan. And rule of origin is a very important question when it comes to USMCA because USMCA is a free trade agreement. This is the thing. US has various rules like yarn forward, fabric forward when it comes to this. But when you look at this recent tariff data, June data is available now to the US. These products are entering US from Mexico and Canada under these favorable terms. And the calculation of the base rate is also from the real data. So we can factor in this whether these products are USMCA eligible or not. Another thing is that the model might factor in the possible textile export from US to these countries. Then this rule of origin might not be a concern, but I agree that. But however, it might not be very possible to factor in all of these things in the model. The other question is, yes, well, now with the decoupling from the US market, Chinese price should go down according to the theory. And as a result of that, they should go to the other markets. It is happening in the model. For example, the EU bound exports go up as a result of that. But this kind of transshipment rules, they are not captured in the model. We cannot estimate that. Like in the base year, the trade is normal. Like Vietnam is importing whatever they want to consume or for production from China. But if we assume now they are trying to use it as a transshipment hub, the demand goes to abnormal level. It cannot be factored in the model. Again, that is the important thing actually about this 40% transshipment tariff. Nobody knows how they are going to calculate this transshipment. The Commerce Secretary once marked that it might be 30%. That means at least 30% value addition should be there for a product not to be considered as a transshipped product. Then wages in the model when exports when exports to the US goes down, the demand for labor goes down and the wage also goes down. But when they absorb the cost, that cannot be modeled. Maybe they might, the natural tendency is that they might need to go for wage cuts. That means the variable sector wages go further down. In that case, they will face a real hardship in attracting labor to their sector because now relative wage is low. People might go to other sectors. In that case, the real output can be lower than the model estimate. Dr.
Thank you very much, Asanka, for a very comprehensive presentation. So, since I'm not a trade expert, I'm just trying to understand some of the model definitions. So, when you say that 20% of the shock, so that means that you apply 20% of across whole, uniformly apply for whole bilateral trade in all the countries, so that you just show the Sri Lanka, America trade rates.
Dr. Not only country specific, as I said, the model has 48 sectors. We showed the effective rate for each sector and each country pair. Not each country pair, like destination is same, USA. And for example, Sri Lanka to USA, we are in apparel. Naive effective rate is 36 point. For China, it is like 54%. We showed like that the individual rates and not uniform rates.
Then this 20% shock means that it applies for Sri Lanka and US trade. Yeah. So then the effect we have been showing, so that US, I think the CEO of this all this trade transaction, Sri Lanka and the US may be a very small volume. I mean that. So in that case, we see that significant effect on US trade, US economy. So I was just wondering whether that. I understand this. Everything is adjusted at the end. So the different countries, but still Sri Lanka is a small player. So how I was just wondering how that it's visible. So
yeah. So this impact distribution happens as the base year market share set. The US exports Sri Lanka's exports to the US was like 1.8 billion in wear and apparel. The US imported close to 86 billion in wear and apparel. So our market share is low, but the what we call US demand for Sri Lanka products are governed by the elasticities, specific elasticities. So they are capturing these changes.
I think it's kind of.
I think what Atul is asking is on one of those slides where you say the GDP contraction for Sri Lanka versus the US is.
yeah.
So the US is covering the entire 100 countries.
Regions 36.
It's not Sri Lanka bilateral.
Yeah.
It's all of the countries in this model. So it's not that any impact on us is impacting the US to that extent.
It's the partial equilibrium and the complete equilibrium.
Okay.
It's like the global model.
Yeah. Yes.
I can. This is not moving.
Yeah, just
When we export to the USA, actually it will be 8-digit richest score they are considering. When we at the richest score, different MFN rates are applied. So this 20% is on top of that. So there will be, different rates for different products. Not only rate. Other techniques, other countries also, that what we supplies to the USA market also unique products are so if you go to the ABT levels, that we see the competition, but sometimes not equal products. That also we have to consider when we analyze this. One thing is that ABT level, which is scores that we need to know, but that is not available in the database, but we have to take it from the buyers of USA or our exporters. These information are available with them only, ABT level information. But the rates, MFN rates applied for the ABT level product. So when the scenario will be a little bit different, the some sectors rates are different. And other countries, I mean, with respect to other countries, there might be some other strategies like the cost. We cannot think about only the tariff only to consider for this competition, because there are so many other areas. As I said, different products are supplying. Even we say the apparel sector, under that there are so many specific products. And also the other countries, they can offer, they can bargain, the cost of production also will be less. They can offer the products, not like in our price. Then we can create something, and the tariff rates we cannot consider as the only criteria to affect the sector exports or imports. My suggestion.
Yep. So, Dr. Abdul, these are the countries in the model. So it is not only Sri Lanka, US in the database. It includes US trade with 169, including Sri Lanka. So that is why we call this as a kind of global trade analysis project. So Sri Lanka is one trade. So all of these bilateral trade flows by within in these different sectors are in the model. So yeah. For Kumudini's questions, one thing is yes, 20% is adding on the MFN. That is, for example, for wear and apparel, the base rate was 16.8. So the new rate will be 38. I did not just add 20 to 15 point. We calculate the tariff level at HS8 digit from US Census. What we did was we added 20% to each existing MFN rate. That is the most appropriate way to factor it. Then, rather than taking the simple average, one technique we use is we get the trade weighted average to capture. For example, some of the MFN rate for Sri Lanka is more than 30%. It is not 16%. When you take the simple average, it is about 12%. When we factor in the different tariff rate and the volume of trade, this becomes 15.8. So HTS US gives you tariff data at 8 digit and 10 digit. The exemptions also we excluded at this level, not arbitrarily calculating 50% for one sector, but we modified the entire tariff schedule. This has about 233,000 observations in US tariff schedule data. Then we calculate the weighted average. So again, someone can argue, okay, our products are different from the products exported by China or some other countries. So we are not real competitors in this sector. One thing we can check is to calculate the market share of these different countries in the product at HS8 digit Sri Lanka exports. So we did that in one of the early slides. That's what I showed. Here you can see in this HS code Sri Lanka exports to the US. China exports 18 billion in the same HS code, HS8 digits. I really don't think, well, I would really like to factor in the fashion changes and the different preferences for different varieties, but this kind of model.
China is, you also done analysis, but we found was China is the main competitor. I think when we compare to India and other countries, even some countries have even but the products are different. Bangladesh and but China is really a competitor for our products.
Okay. Yeah, but you can see in the same products, actually, other countries also export significant volume. The issue is in the same HS codes. One thing is, if a country is producing a similar product, similar wear and apparel product, when they have a tariff advantage in the long run, they can go into the other sectors. So those things happen in.
Hi, Dr. Asanka. Thank you very much for a comprehensive presentation. My question is with regards to the pass-through effect on tariff rates. So you have assumed it's 100%. Can we factor in the possibility of drawing from a distribution, sample distribution? My question, rationale for asking that particular question is, I think Goldman Sachs had done a research and President Trump had asked the CEO of Goldman Sachs to fire his economists because they have said that US companies have absorbed about 64% of the total cost and US consumers have absorbed 22%, whereas foreign exporters just 14%. I know this is a very high level statement, but that being the rationale, can we draw from a distribution for pass-through tariffs and see what kind of changes lie in it? Kind of might be a sensitivity. I don't know. Just
yeah. Thanks, Sanjay. Yes, I saw the actual plus then I was talking about that pass-through. It was very interesting study. This is the thing, in that pass-through study, they were factoring in 10%. And the sentiment was like that this might be temporary, so they were just trying to eat the tariff cost in this period. Now, if you follow Cavallo's famous paper, USTR cited about this 25% pass-through, he is tracking the prices now, what is going on. What they see is now the pass-through is becoming accelerated because now retailers know this is going to stay. This tariff is going to stay. So my guess might be 22% to the 22% eaten by the consumer might be an underestimate in the long run. It will be passed, but we don't know. Unfortunately, we cannot factor this in the model, like what will be happening in the pass-through. Might be it is possible we might need to change all of these equations. I might need to check that. But right now we see that this cost, we assume that this cost is transferred to the consumers. As a result of that, the purchasing patterns are changing and also relative prices are changing. Yeah, this pass-through might be a very interesting topic in the coming period. In the 2018 studies, it was a limited trade go, especially washing machines, solar panels. Those were the target of 2018 trade go. The pass-through was near complete, 100%, even in the Cavallo's paper. However, some retailers did not pass it to the consumer. So they absorbed it and reduced their profit margin. But some products like washing machines, rice, and the cost of washing machine, that change in the US market was near perfect. That means pass-through was 100. Especially in these products like wear and apparel, we don't know, might be retailers will lead that. Again, someone can argue these are consumer goods. It might be readily passed to the consumer.
Scenario 1 scenario, Sri Lanka imposed 30% and 20%. So for the other countries, you imposed reciprocal tariff or base tariff. Scenario 1 and 2. So I think you impose that base tariff. So tariff for those countries like China, India, and Mexico, the story, I think that's sometimes different for that because that we see that negative dark side for the Sri Lanka. Also, under the scenario 4, you Mexico mentioned that 3%. I think that in that model is mentioned 0% or 1%, but you have calculated 3%. So if we impose 35% for Mexico and China 30%, our export also there is no significant effect. I think scenario 4. You consider that paradigm. So how did you calculate that paradigm? Because that data could have so because there's a data level. So it's important.
first let's take reciprocal tariff, how I applied that thing. For each region, I individually show the reciprocal rates announced on July 31st of 2025. That means for India, it is 25%. For Brazil, it is 50%. But for countries like Brazil, it is not 50% uniformly because there were exemptions at product level, HS 8-digit. So we factored in those things. So every change, every exemption, every sectional tariff like steel, aluminum, copper, we factored in this calculation and simultaneously showed when Sri Lanka get 30%, all the other countries in the model get what is the effective rate of them. In Mexico, this is the thing, is what effective rate. What we calculate was base rate was calculated using 2024 tariff rate at HSTS US, that is 10 digit. In 10 digit, some products went to US under USMCA, but some did not. Some were under tariff because USMCA coverage was not 100%. Then the IEPA tariff, that was 25%, applied application of IEPA was also not uniform. For example, Mexico still have to pay 50% for steel and aluminum. They were not exempted, and copper. But for potash and energy, it was 10%. And auto parts, when they are USMCA eligible, they were not subjected to 25%. If they are not USMCA eligible, they were subject to this reciprocal tariff. So we factored in those. That's how we calculated this effective rate.
Scenario 1, Mexico apparel.
This 3.1. Yeah.
The shock value for Mexico, reciprocal tariff shock when you check for the Sri Lanka 20% or 30%. What is the shock value for the Mexico? Is that 3% or reciprocal?
No, this is the effective rate for this wear and apparel sector. So assume now in the wear and apparel sector, there are 100 products. 70 products go to US under USMCA rate, that is 0. So in the model, it is 0 in our calculation. But the remaining 30, they might have to pay 25% because these are not USMCA eligible. Then weighted by trade, we calculate the effective rate. So for this sector, current effective rate is 3.1 for Mexico. It is 36.8 for Sri Lanka.
I think specifics of the details you might, because the trade agreements also coming here, no exceptions to the Mexico.
Well, they renegotiated NAFTA, but now I think, yes, it is possible.
Thank you, Asanka. I just want a quick question. On the, from the bilateral trade balance impacts of the different scenarios, for the entirety of the Sri Lankan trade balance to have this, I think, see is there the graph that can show us what the impact will be on our overall trade balance as a result of this.
Sorry, yeah, I actually did not put that. One major thing is trade balance is not changing much. There are different things going on. One thing is, in our model, we expect that there will be about $200 million less exports to the US in wear and apparel. But in the same time, when we export less amount of wear and apparel, our imports also go down by about 150 million in textiles. So as a result of that, in most of these scenarios, trade balance is varying between million -50 to +50. It is not a huge amount. Other thing, what is going on, our net exports are not going down drastically because some compensations happen. Although 12 percentage point reduction is expected in the US market, we export more for some other markets. Same thing goes for rubber, for example.
So if I were to broadly understand, then what we are saying is there isn't an immediate external sector threat, right?
Sorry, Dr. But here the assumption is that exchange rate will be flexible. So if it might be fixed, then this can be changed.
So external sector impact is very modest. Then the GDP impact is also zero, negative 0.007, right? So what the real sort of concern is the sectoral impacts on specific industries, isn't it? And the employment consequences and how that adjustment takes place. But in terms of the economy-wide impacts, it's relatively manageable at 20%. And if we were to get down to 15, we would be in fact better off. The 15% simulation would place us in a better position relative to our competitors, and the economic impact be even softer.
So this actually, for example, in the standard closure, we assume that wages will be flexibly adjust. So other sectors might be able to absorb this idling labor. Then their output will go up. So those things should happen in the economy. If there are frictions for wages, or assume there are like minimum wage rules like that, it can be a bit different. But in the long run, we can safely assume wages are flexible. In that case, negative impact is low. However, we can see industrial sectors contracting a bit, especially the traditional sectors like ware and apparel, and agricultural sector is growing. That kind of adjustment costs are the major concern, right?
Very important presentation. I just had a few questions for my understanding. So I think you touched upon this a bit right now as well. Is it fair to say the model is is better at capturing the longer run effects than the short run? That's number one. The second is the employment impact seems very muted. If you can just get whether number one, this is under the unemployment model closure, and if you can explain the drivers of this muted impact. The third was on the scenario under which the tariffs are eliminated. You mentioned the revenue impact is around negative 0.28%. Is this in nominal terms? Do you have an idea of what the revenue impact would be in terms of GDP?
Well, let me explain first about the para-tariff effect. This is actually from real GDP, that when the model comes to a new equilibrium, we can calculate GDP from expenditure side and income side. And the income side, tax revenue is one component. So we can compare this contribution to various across various scenarios. One is base year. So first, in the base year to 20, the revenue impact can be negative because GDP is contracting. This 0.289 percentage point loss is once we factor in this, once we reduce this to 20% impact, because the model is around 20% plus para-tariff elimination. Now 20% revenue impact and also para-tariff revenue impact are both together. Once the para-tariff elimination effect is isolated, the effect is 0.28. This is not percentage of GDP, but GDP's revenue component. Yeah. Compared to the base year, this might be the loss. We did partial equilibrium analysis, but as I said, partial equilibrium analysis is not factoring in these various changes, but it gives kind of first indication what will happen. From 2024 revenue estimates, Sri Lanka, if Sri Lanka remove tariffs only for the US, the impact might be close to about 0.3% as we calculated. Here it is 0.289.
I just had some questions on this. This captures the long run, right? Is it fair to say that the model captures the long run effects better than the short run?
Yeah, standard closure is more like a long run. Yeah, and unemployment, when unemployment is allowed, for Sri Lanka, it might be the most plausible short run model because wages adjust rigidly. Now the sectors will have to go for quantitative adjustments.
Hello, thanks for the presentation. I hope you can hear me. Just trying to square the fact that you say that what's happening here is sort of a reverse structural trend, right? You're going from heavy industrial sectors back to more agriculture. And with the point that the overall economy-wide effect is close to zero, how do you combine those 2 points, right? Are you saying that structural transformation didn't bring so much economic growth relative to reversing them? I don't know if the question is clear, but because in net you're going back to sort of a no impact of so there's a distribution in sectors, right? From the more industrial sectors to the less industrial sector. But overall the change in economic output and income is zero, close to zero. What does that mean for structural transformation or where we are or where Sri Lanka is in that?
Yeah, these effects might be like, for example, impact on the labor. Assume now the service sector has more share in the economy. Although the overall economic effect is not that high, it generates a very fragile economy right now because in the COVID, we experienced that service sector totally collapsed. But when the industrial sector was in a good position to run the economy. The other thing is that in these sectors we see which could absorb the idling labor from the industrial sector, these sectors are notorious for this informality when it comes to labor arrangements. So these kind of issues can happen. For example, in the agriculture sector, wages are low, and also these are not EPF, ETF paying kind of jobs. But where in apparel sector, rubber manufacturing, these are kind of relatively good jobs. So these are the changes we can see in the economy.
Question on the model. You said the 2017 input output was what data was taken for us, right? And we talked to 2024 input output. But does the shock take care of the interlinkages and changes that the economy has gone through in that interim period?
If there were structural changes like consumer preferences and those things, no, because elasticities are not changing. We are using 2017 elasticities. But in the overall economy, like the cost shares and also the economy's productive capacity, because now we are looking for the labor force. Another thing is that we are more worried about the trade shares for example, in the US, what is the trade share of Sri Lanka in 2024 and what is model predicting, like that. So we check for those things. Those are in close in a tolerable level. Actually, we can change that in the model if you want to make it exactly as the census shares. But that structural changes, these are not factored in, because in that case, we will have to rebuild the model from the beginning, like estimating these elasticities and everything.
So are we on the assumption that the Sri Lankan economy through COVID, through the economic crisis has gone through and we have no real sense of those changes, behavioral changes, HIS data set is not available. I know no option but to plug this in. So would this be a overestimate or underestimate? What's your best judgment? If we were to think that, you know, there have been significant shifts in the economy in the last 6 years. Would this be an under or overestimate?
It is a bit hard to tell, Dr. Ivan. The only way we can get an idea is get in a new output table, input-output table, and check how the economy is structurally functioning compared to 2017. Then thank you very much for attending, and I want to thank some people about this study. At the IPS, we were planning this. We were trying to develop the general equilibrium modeling capacity for some time, for like 3 years now. When we got the capacity, luckily this happened actually. So we could run the model. At that point, we had the model and database, GEMPAC, and everything at the IP. But throughout this period, there were a lot of people helping us, especially Australians are very good in the CG modeling. We have some Sri Lankan economists who are working with the IPS closely. Professor Bandarlage, Atulana Rampanawa, and they were helping us to run this. And Victoria University has a dedicated unit. They run the GEMPAC software, maintain the GEMPAC software. They are kind of the best modelers in the world when it comes to GTAP and CG. They publish a paper within like 1 month under various assumptions because they had the model and also they had the effective rates calculated. So I always cross-check my work with them. They help a lot, especially Professor James Chase. I want to thank them. And at the IPS, this is a co-funded project. So we have this small grant. It is helping us a lot in this kind of work. And thank you very much for comments and the questions. And I think they are still. Okay. We have published this in a blog, in a detailed blog. It is available in our Token Economics blog. You can get access to that. And we will publish this in a more comprehensive working paper once we get reviewers' comments, and there is a process for that. Once we clear that, we will publish. There is tea in the executive lounge. Please join us. Thank you very much.